You join me at a rather windy British Motor Museum in Gaydon. Extremely windy to the point where I've got to have both hands on the camera so it doesn't get blown away. Because of the recent COVID crisis, you might have heard of it, there are relatively few people in here today, and that means we've got pretty much an exclusive look at some of the incredible cars right here at the British Motor Museum. Unfortunately, or fortunately for you I guess, I have got to wear a mask while I'm in there, so the camera's going to be pointed pretty much away from me entirely, so you get a fantastic look at some of the beauties contained within. Straight away, this is something worth looking at. This is a 1980 Bedford CF electric. You don't see these very often because they made about 4 of them. They were experimenting with electric vans back in the 1970s, and this particular one is effectively a limo. You can see the amount of space there is back there, and that's because this one was actually built for Prince Charles. It's got a 70 kilowatt electric motor, tops out at around about 50 miles an hour, and you're talking about a range of roughly 40 miles. From one beauty to another, the oldest surviving Series 1 Land Rover. In fact, a 1948 Series 1, the very first pre-production model, affectionately known as Huey because of the number plate. This is pretty much priceless, but it's almost certain that Jeff will be more interested in this. A 1959 Morris Mini Minor, in fact the very first production model. Once again, they will have Mini fans like Jeff absolutely wetting themselves with excitement. But if you're a Jag man like Phil, you might prefer this, the almighty, legendary 77 RW. We are not worthy. Let's just take a minute and admire what is almost certainly the best E-Type in the world. For those of you that don't know the story behind this, this is the one that Norman Dewis drove from Coventry to Geneva overnight. It's had a restoration very nearly into the millions, and it's insured for something around £10 million, I believe. I don't really want to get too much closer than this because this is one of the most valuable cars in the world. Just bathe in the magnificence of this thing. Bloody magnificent. We love an SD1 here at Classics World, and this one we love more than most because it's the estate version, the ill-fated SD1 prototype, which from that angle at least looks quite a lot like our Montego. We'll move on. Michael Edwards himself actually used one of the SD1 estate prototypes as his company car for a little while, so yep, this thing's got pedigree with the big boss himself. But unfortunately, BL's finances at the time meant that this could never go beyond its prototype stage. Shame really. Looks like a TR7 from this angle, right? Yep, still TR7, still TR7. That ain't no TR7. This is a Triumph Lynx prototype. It was intended to be released around 1978 to replace the Stag, because obviously that was a bit long in the tooth by the end of the 70s. This was to be the next big thing, and it had an extended wheelbase over the standard coupe and convertible TR7 to allow for full-size rear seats, a la Reliant Scimitar, I suppose, and what is actually quite a big boot. This is almost a GT car. Unfortunately, by the late 1970s, BL were flopping in sales and flopping in popularity, as we've said before, and that meant the world of sports cars was an extravagance they could ill afford. So there are only 18 known Lynx prototypes. This is one of them, and it never got beyond that stage. But when you see it sat here in arguably the best colour for a TR7, with the louvres, with that fantastic brown interior, has to be said, shame they never made it. You've all heard of the Rover P6. Well, this is a Rover T4. Yet another one of those concepts that we really should have got but never did. It's based broadly on the P6 platform. It even uses the same basic body and chassis under this slightly different nose, but you'll notice the lack of radiator grille. That's not because it's electric, that's because it's powered by a gas turbine. That's right, this used twin gas turbines in fact, and the idea would be to replace a conventional internal combustion engine with something whacking out somewhere around 140 horsepower. It's wild to think this thing was developed theoretically in the late 1950s, and obviously it's way less harmful to the environment than a conventional petrol engine, but there are 2 major downsides. Number 1, it is very, very thirsty. We're talking around 16 miles per every gallon of kerosene in this thing. And number 2, it was estimated to cost around £3,500 to £4,000 if it went onto the market. To put it into perspective, a Rover P6 was just under £2,000. This thing sadly was a victim of its own brilliance, ahead of its time, and as a result, it never really had its time. There are so many MGBs waiting to be restored that a lot of them aren't half the car they used to be. Well, this one never was a whole car. This is in fact a split MGB GT, known affectionately as the half section, that was used for the car's launch at the 1965 Earls Court Motor Show, and then upgraded to Mark II spec for the launch of the Mark II in '67 at the Turin Motor Show. And it must be said, yeah, still some work needed on that one. This Morris Minor is a big deal because it's a 1948 Morris Minor Lowlight, and it's the first one. This one was in fact used as a Morris press car for a couple of years, then it was sold on, and then it was exchanged with the owner of it in return for one of the limited edition Morris Minor Millions. It was then given away in a competition where the winner of said competition would get what was thought to be the oldest Morris Minor in existence, and it later turned out to be the first. That's a properly special thing, and it truly is one of a kind. You might think the 77 RW is as motoring royalty as it gets around here, but this car takes it to another level. Yes, it's a Rover P5B, but it's actually Her Majesty the Queen's Rover P5B. That's right, this was the Queen's daily driver, I suppose, back in the 60s, finished as she specified in this rather gorgeous dark green, and it features a radio and telephone, again special order for Her Maj. When you call another car motoring royalty, just question whether it's deserving of it when this car was the Queen's runaround. Yet another example of why the British Motor Museum is pretty much a must-visit location. Prototypes like this that you simply don't see out in the wild, or even at your local classic car show. This is a 1969 Mini 9X concept, and you might think that doesn't look much like a Mini, and you'd be absolutely right. In fact, this was a concept car. This was made in response to various European rivals to the Mini coming out with those newfangled hatchback boot lids, and indeed the 9X does have one. How very forward-thinking for a car that was basically a saloon with no rear end up to now. Unfortunately, management were not as responsive to the 9X as they had been to the Mini. They didn't like the way it looked, it was far too awkward, and as a result, it never got beyond this 1969 concept. Bit of a shame though, because when you consider the European rivals that came out, even really basic stuff like the likes of the Renault 4 that had a hatchback on it, BMC effectively left the door open for more practical rivals to do it better. How very British. We're filming this in 2020, even though you're probably not seeing it till 2021, and that makes this year, as I film this, 60 years since Jaguar bought Daimler, and as a result the British Motor Museum have got an exhibit on celebrating some of Daimler's finest moments with some truly magnificent examples of their own work and Jaguars that were made altogether a bit nicer. There are any number of brilliant Jaguars and Daimlers at the British Motor Museum, but the one I want to concentrate on is this one, the X300 Daimler Corsica. This, if you couldn't tell, is a two-door convertible X300 XJ, and it must be said, it's absolutely stunning, isn't it? It's got the crinkly number plate plinth and the crinkly grille, as you notice, and inside it is altogether a slightly nicer affair than your X300 Sovereign. However, this was never intended to go into production. It was only ever intended to be a showpiece to show that British craftsmanship, the sort of work that Daimler plied itself on back in the day, was very much still a thing, but unfortunately not enough of a thing to warrant this being a production car, which is a shame because it must be said, I think we're looking there at one of the most beautiful British cars ever made. Controversial, I know. So that brings to an end our little walk around for you of the British Motor Museum in Gaydon, and this is frankly one of the best places to be in Britain if you're into your classic cars. Even just from where I'm standing now on the top floor, you can see Paddy Hopkirk's Mini, you can see a 6R4 Metro. I can walk around all day showing you, but frankly you need to come and have a look for yourself. Nothing beats getting up close and personal with some of the finest pieces of British motoring history, and this is as good as it gets. Our friends at Lancaster Insurance are giving away this fantastic 1984 Ford Escort XR3i. It's free and easy to enter. All you got to do is follow the link on screen and fill out the form under the competitions tab. T's and C's do apply, and good luck.